Our scripture reading this morning is Matthew 2, 1 through 12, and 16 through 18 from the New Revised Standard Version. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star in the east and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out. And there, ahead of them, went the star that they had seen in the east, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that star and stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the Magi. Then what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more. May God add his blessing to the reading of this word.
Good morning, and welcome to Epiphany Sunday. Now, Epiphany isn't until Tuesday, but this is the Sunday that's closest to Epiphany, so here we are. Now, the word Epiphany is often used to describe that moment when we finally recognize something that's been in front of us the whole time, or when we realize something that we thought was true isn't. And so most definitions describe an epiphany as a manifestation or a moment of revelation often attributed to a divine source. It's similar to the word eureka, which also means a moment of discovery. Now, the most famous eureka moment in history is attributed to the ancient Greek mathematician Archimedes. And if you've ever taken a physics class, Archimedes is the one who says, "Give me a lever and I shall move the world." Right. He's also known for another story, which I think is better, just because it's kind of funny. He also discovered the principle of buoyancy while he was sitting in a bathtub. And he noticed that the water level rose as he submerged himself in the tub of water. And legend says that when he realized what that meant, he jumped out of the tub, ran naked through the streets, yelling, "Eureka!" which in Greek means, "I found it." I understand the joy of discovery. Honestly, I do. But is it worth going to jail for, right? This week's scripture is about revelation and discovery. We need to back up briefly, though, from last week when we focused just on Joseph and Mary's flight to Egypt to protect their child. That's what we focused on last week. This week is Epiphany, which means we turn our attention to the Magi from the east. Now, the word Magi is most often translated wise men in a lot of our Bible translations, but it refers more specifically to a priestly class of mages from Persia, which is roughly Iran. They were religious figures outside of Judaism, what we might call pagans, who were deeply suspicious of the Roman Empire. Why? Because Rome didn't just conquer territories, it imposed its cultures and values on the people who were living there. So when in Rome, do as the Romans do was less of a suggestion and more of a threat. You might say that the phrase always came with an unspoken or else. Many scholars believe that in Matthew's birth narrative, the Magi represent the old ways. Persian priests practiced Zoroastrianism, which is a tradition that used astronomy and astrology for guidance. The Reverend Dr. Boyoung Lee writes that the Magi carried within themselves a spirit of resistance to the Hellenization of their land. Now, Hellenization refers to the spread of Greek and Roman culture, which is something that the Persians rejected. They did not see Herod as a legitimate king. They saw him as a Roman puppet dressed up like a Judean ruler who was more loyal to Rome than Judaism. And Dr. Lee suggested that the Magi may have been intrigued by the idea of an indigenous king reclaiming the Judean throne. So when they heard prophecies about a child from the house of David who would be called the King of the Jews, they traveled to Judea to see for themselves. As Dr. Lee puts it, perhaps in the sign of an indigenous king to be restored to the Judean throne, they recognized a hope, not unlike their own, for a restored Persian ruler. Now, our theme for Advent and Christmas this year has been hope is greater than fear. So think about how courageous these Magi were to knock on Herod's door. Hi, we're from out of town. We heard there's a child recently born around here who's going to be the legitimate king of Judea. We're here to pay him homage, not you, King Herod, the child. Whew. Wow. The audacity of these guys. That is a flex, isn't it? Good grief. So, here's what I appreciate about this passage. For weeks now, we have talked about the fear that Herod caused Joseph and Mary. Now, the tables are all turned around. Matthew writes, when King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all of Jerusalem with him, meaning the religious elite who had something to lose if Herod wasn't on the throne. What usually happens when a bully gets scared? He goes into self-protection mode. So Herod summoned the Magi back to his palace and said, okay, go find the child. However you do that, using stars or whatever, you go find the child. And when you do, come back and tell me so that I may pay homage to him too. Yeah, that's it. No, really, I want to give the little guy a present too. Sure, Herod. Totally believable. The Magi saw right through his deceit. They find the child. They offer gifts of extraordinary value, and they return home by another route, refusing to report back to Herod. They know what he will do if he finds Jesus. And what does Herod do when he's thwarted? He orders the death of every child in Bethlehem under the age of 2. Violence is always the last refuge of threatened power. And that's when Joseph and Mary escaped to Egypt, which is what we focused on last week. Now, Dr. Lee raises an intriguing possibility here. Those gifts that the Magi gave the Holy Family, what if those gifts funded their escape? Again, that is pure speculation, but wow, wouldn't that be something? So here we are at the end of Advent and Christmas, and yet 2,000 years later, the world still brims with violence, uncertainty, and fear. The birth of Christ did not silence the Herods of the world. Empires still rage. The innocent still suffer. The question is not whether fear exists. The question is, what do we do with it? Do we freeze? Do we flee? Or do we move forward, as the Magi did, refusing to let fear have that final word? Now, the church has a tendency to domesticate this story. We kind of mash Matthew and Luke's birth stories together, and we throw in shepherds and magi in the same nativity set, and we call it Christmas. And believe me, I'm guilty of it. We're guilty of it. Look at this over here. There's shepherd, here's 3 magi, 2 different stories, and we just kind of mashed it up. I do it every year when I bring my willow tree Christmas nativity set out. There they are, sheep, donkeys, shepherds. And of course, the year that Willow Tree came out with the little shepherd boy with the goat, I got it because, goats. And, I made sure to get that. And of course, there are 3 magi, 3. Few angels, Joseph, Mary, baby Jesus. When the kids were little, Thor, Hulk, and Captain America quite often wandered out of their toy boxes, and they paid homage to the Christ child too. But again, let's be honest. Matthew 2 is not a cozy little fairy tale. From the opening line, we are reminded that this story happens in the time of King Herod, a ruler known for his paranoia and brutality. Herod represents the worst kind of power. Power that responds to threat, not with humility, but with violence. And the massacre of innocent children harkens back to Pharaoh's fear of the child Moses, generations before in the Exodus story. And into this volatile landscape come the Magi, foreigners, Gentiles, astrologers, marginal figures, and yet they are the first to recognize the Christ child. Isn't that interesting? Pagan astrologers were the first to recognize the Christ child, and women were the ones who recognized the risen Christ. They were the first to recognize the risen Christ. But that's the way it works. Nothing about Jesus' story is typical. It disrupts imperial, racial, cultural, theological expectations, and this is what Epiphany reveals. God's movement does not stay in safe places among approved people, right? Matthew's gospel consistently places God's activity on the margins. Jesus is not born in Jerusalem, but in Bethlehem. He is not recognized by the religious elites, but by pagan astrologers. He is not protected by armies, but by dreams of a refugee father who listens to angels. This is about an upside-down kingdom, one that refuses imperial logic. Herod trembles, Jerusalem trembles, but the Magi, they do not turn back. They seek, they kneel, they listen, they bring gifts, they move forward. Epiphanies are not always warm or gentle. Sometimes they're disruptive. Sometimes they are dangerous. Sometimes they send us home by another way. And they always ask us the same question. Will we move the way fear tells us to move, or by the way that love calls us to move? In the face of fear, let us travel together. Let us kneel not before power, but before the Christ child. Let us believe with trembling hope that fear does not have the last word. Because fear doesn't stop us. Love leads us forward.